Hey everybody, sorry about being a little bit late. We had some technical difficulties, but today we're talking about editing podcasts. And more specifically, we'll be talking about what we use, what our processes are, and sort of how we approach it. And if any of you who are watching have any questions, we'll be answering those as well. For those of you that are new to the stream, I'm Jesse, and since we're running a little bit late, I'll kind of skip the longer introduction and introduce Matthew Bliss, who's here as usual. So, Matthew, do you want to say hi to everybody?
Sure, I'm Matt Bliss. I have the wrong device, the wrong settings, and the technical issues today. So it's my apologies for us being a little bit late. I'd be happy to go into the details of that if we have a bit more time, because I think this kind of troubleshooting can be really handy for people to know how you go about it. But if you'd like to know who I am really, if this is your first time here, Matthew Bliss, podcast editor and producer, soon to be coach and consultant, host of Coffee with a Podcaster, co host of Help Before You Sell, and any number of other podcasts that I've been a guest on. And I think today we're going to be talking about editing, which is one of the things which, as a podcaster, unless you have a ton of money, you can't really avoid. And I think there's a lot of best practices and potentially differences that we're going to discuss today. And I think we should probably lead out with some of the big ones because I reckon a lot of people think they know what editing is. But again, it's one of those fog of war things for me. It's you don't know what you don't know until you don't know it. And hopefully, a discussion like the one we're going to have today is going to be one of those times where you can note down a list of things that you should look up to improve your editing stack. I think that's still a term that gets used these days. So, what are we going to start with, Jesse? What would you like to start with anyway?
Well, first, before we start, I have a little bit of a disclaimer, and I just want to say that when it comes to editing audio, there generally isn't a right way to do things, but there can definitely be a wrong way. For a lot of other things, we figure out our own way, and that's not necessarily right or wrong. And I do hear the phrase that if it sounds good, it is good quite often. But the thing to really ask yourself is, do you truly know what good sounds like? I've run across more than a few posts on social media of people talking about how great their audio sounds. Hey, listen to my audio. It sounds great. And I'm recording next to a refrigerator with my AC running, and there's lawnmowers outside. They're just throwing it into the Adobe audio chipper, and they don't hear all the noise that was on the original recording, so they think it sounds great. What they're not hearing is the gating. They're not hearing the artifacts. They're not hearing that overprocessed sound that programs like that tend to put on. So the thing to really keep in mind is it takes time to develop those critical listening skills that allow you to really determine what good is. Just because it sounds good to you, it doesn't necessarily mean that it does sound good. And you don't build those critical listening skills just by listening to audio. We are bombarded with average to poor quality audio everywhere these days. So it's tough to really learn what good audio is when we're being normalized to average quality audio. And now that I have that little disclaimer out of the way, do you have any before we start?
None, except that I would like to reserve us the right to get into the details and into the weeds eventually in our discussion about the things that may not have an impact on what is listenable, but instead what makes your audio sound great. Because the thing that you mentioned with what did you call it, Adobe Audio Chipper or something? um, the reason that sounds great is that because the comparison to your lawnmower air conditioning filled noisy environment to what it produces is so much better than what it was, that you completely ignore the things that you mentioned that are a problem with the Adobe Enhance version 2 or version 1 or whatever preference you have. So I would like to reserve us the right to jump into those things that are the 10% that people don't often think of, but that can make a big impact on the quality of your audio.
Yes, I think we will definitely come to that. But let's get started with just talking about our process. So for me, because my brain tends to go blank in these types of things, I have a little bit of a cheat sheet, if I can find it.
For sure. And as a heads up, for anyone listening or watching this now, our processes are going to be different, but I think that's going to be representative of how we came up. Because I'm literally from the bottom up, having no audio background at all before getting into podcasting, and you've got an engineering background, audio engineering background for music, and coming from the top down to podcasting. So it's going to be interesting to match those processes together and see what stacks up.
And actually, I basically started from the ground up with my editing process because the approach for music is completely different from how we'd approach dialogue. And to touch on that just for a minute, I hear people talk about, well, I can't learn another DAW because I've spent so much time learning this one and it's going to take me too long to learn. Learning the first DAW is what takes the time. You already understand all the skills that go into it. So if you know one DAW, it's going to be easier for you to learn a second DAW. And I really do feel that some DAWs are better than others when it comes to editing dialogue. And if you feel like you're spending a lot of time doing certain things, it might be worth looking into some other options. You may be using the best one for you, but you may not, and you won't know that until you try. And I speak from experience. I've been using Logic since I think 2001, so we're coming on nearly 25 years. So I know that inside and out. But when I started trying to edit dialogue with it, it's just not really built for that. You have to, it just isn't. So I started trying all the other DAWs I've collected over the years and ones that I haven't. The first one I tried was Hindenburg. I did not get along with the way it displays audio waveforms. So I just moved on to the next one. I went through everything, came back to Hindenburg because that was the one that offered the best workflow for how I work and the most efficient workflow for doing dialogue editing. Now that we've talked about that part, my process is, since I edit pretty much strictly for clients, the first thing is getting the files. I'm working on a way to automate getting the files onto my computer by having them upload to a specific Google Drive folder, which will then download the files where I want them on my computer. So that's going to save some time. Once I have the files, I create the file that, or the folder I'm going to work from, put the tracks in there, and then I'll bring those tracks into my DAW. Since Hindenburg, the DAW that I do use, it auto levels all of the tracks when I drag them in. So they're already, I don't have to do anything with loudness to get them at the same starting point. So I'm pretty much ready to start mixing my tracks. First thing I do is noise and reverb reduction if needed, and really unless it's something that I'm recording in my own room, it's going to need some noise and reverb reduction because I have not met a podcaster who isn't just recording in a spare bedroom office in their home that's not really treated for acoustics. Next up, I'll add a gate. Let me backtrack. For noise reduction, I'm pretty much exclusively using Sentai's DX Revive Pro for those tasks for noise and reverb reduction. For gate, I'm only using Sonible Smart Gate. Main reason is it works better than a traditional gate because it's smarter. It does a much better job of identifying noise versus dialogue. And it can also be effective at ducking down a lot of moderate breath sounds. So once we've got that taken care of, another reason I use the gate is I'm one of those people who I don't like seeing little quiet sounds when other people are talking. So it saves me from having to make additional cuts that I wouldn't have to otherwise. Actually, that's not true. I end up cutting all of the stuff anyway, so I'll come back to that when we get into the editing part.
So it's all right. We're the same on that front, I think. Maybe that's the curse we can share at the very end of the stream that we both share, the detail orientation that you just can't avoid.
Yep. So now that we've done the gating, we've got mouth clicks to contend with, which isn't always necessary. It really depends on the person and the mic. Next up, I've got DS and deplosives. Actually, for mouth clicks, I use iZotope RX mouth declick. For de-essing and deplosiving, I use Sonible Smart DS. You'll start seeing a trend here pretty quickly. For EQ, I'm using Sonible Smart EQ. For compression, I'm using Sonible Smart Compression. And the last thing on my track is going to be a loudness meter. Even though Hindenburg auto levels everything, once we start applying effects or processing to it, that's going to change the output level. So I use the loudness meter so I can see my loudness after all of the processing. It allows me to make sure both tracks stay at consistent loudness. And then on my master bus, output bus, stereo bus, 2-bus, whatever it's called in your world, I've got a compressor, the Universal Audio API 2500. That's just doing a very minimal amount of compression. We've got a limiter just to catch those peaks if we were to hit any, and then to add that final bit of loudness. And then I follow that up with a loudness meter. So I'm using the limiter less to catch overs, but mainly to get that overall loudness so that when I'm done editing, I've already achieved my final loudness. I don't have to run any additional processing. So when I'm done editing, I'm pretty much ready to render the file. And if it's an audio only, I'm rendering to WAV. If it's for video, I'm rendering Apple lossless. And then I'll convert to MP3 in iZotope RX. So that's my basic process for mixing the audio. When it comes to the editing stuff, actually, let's turn it over to you, Matt, to talk about your process, and then we'll talk about editing itself.
Sure. So I think you're a bit further along the listening journey than I am. Look, at the very beginning of my process, like I get the files the same way as you do. I try to organize them the best way that I can. I generally, I could get my files any which way. I think I'm less fortunate in having clients that give me the highest quality stuff in the things that I want. Generally, the clients that I provide a recorder for, I'll use Riverside and download whatever they've recorded with me on that front. Otherwise, it could be a Zoom file. It could be something recorded from Boomcaster. It could be any number of things that I get. It doesn't vary all that much, but what it does mean for organization is that I can't automate that the way that you want to, which is pretty cool to my mind. Once I get the files, I should mention, for audio editing at least, my DAW of choice is Adobe Audition. I've used that since I started editing podcasts for my workplace back in Australia back in 2021. And they were footing the bill for the most part until 2023 when I left to come to Ireland. So it's the platform I've been most familiar with. The cost hasn't been too far out of the realms of things. It's allowed me to explore a lot of stuff. Getting out of the Adobe ecosystem is something that I've wanted to do, but I've stuck with it because it's giving me what I need, and it's a good crutch while I still figure some things out for myself. But bringing the files into Adobe Audition in whatever format they come in, and once I get the files in, like you, I will start with Accentizer's DX Revive Pro to create that initial export. But I bounce it first. Like a lot of people who want to do that as a first step, like us, I would recommend anyone doing that to bounce it to a track so that you're not doing the full AI export, depending on the capacity of your computer. Jesse, I don't know how good your Apple hardware is at using Accentizer's stuff, but depending on the length of the file and the complexity and the algorithm you choose, it can sometimes take 20, 30 minutes to bounce one of those tracks. And for context, I'm on a Windows computer with a 14th gen i7 CPU and a RTX 4070 graphics card in whatever way that contributes, which I think is incredibly little for the moment. But yeah, DX Revive Pro first on any tracks that I feel need it. Sometimes I get tracks that have been recorded in an environment that's great with a microphone that's awesome, in which case I don't need to. And my usual stack or progression through the plugins that I use is iZotope RX. I've stuck with that for the most part for a long time. If there is any denoising that I need to do, I will either use spectral if it's a consistent background noise, or voice denoise if it's just a general remove from the background. After that, I use sibilance from Waves as a de-esser, and it tends to do a pretty good job. Though, if you have been with us since we started, you might remember that the headphones that I use to edit, they apparently have quite a boost in the high end. So I might be preemptively de-essing things that aren't as essy as I thought they would be. But they sound all right on the other end with different devices, so I presume that's okay. So sibilance for de-essing, then mouth declick, then de-reverb, or some combination of those two. And mouth declick is just magical. I don't know why anyone wouldn't have that in their stack anyway, just in case. I can already hear excuse me, tap the microphone there. I can already hear the mouth clicks in my mouth right now, and I'm like, why don't we have this just in life in general? So de-reverb, mouth declick, and after that, that's pretty much the cleanup for me. And then I move on to EQ if it's necessary. I tend to roll off 60 hertz every time, but I use the default parametric EQ plugin for Adobe on that one. And following that, I will do some combination of the single band compressor from Adobe and the I think it's called the hard limiter, depending on what the needs are. Now, when I say needs, this general template or progression can be swapped around sometimes. Like yesterday, for example, I found that I had to process a track by someone who was using an omnidirectional laptop mic with a fan, and it meant that the DX Revive Pro processing was incredibly poor. And so I had to spectral denoise and hard limit at certain points where there was uproarious laughter for no reason at all, to my mind, and process that. And that was limit on one side and the other side to try and bring it into a loudness into the edit time for the rest of that template that I'll be going through a bit later in the week. So they can really happen in any order. Now, the thing that I know you're not going to approve of, Jesse, and that I've been hesitant to get up to, but here we are. You've actually listened to the stuff that I do before we met properly, and you were like, yeah, that sounds pretty good. Don't have any issues with it. So remember you said that once. Generally, the way that I will try to set up the compression and the limiting and the additional volume leveling is so that I can use match loudness in Adobe Audition to get to the -16 LUFS that I usually target for output. Now, it doesn't always work that well. I am aware of the chain that you mentioned just then, and that's originally how I was taught, like the get you lean loudness meter in there, get an idea of both the tracks, get a hard limiter on the mix bus, and gain it up until you hit an average of -16. That makes sense to me. But like you with your Sonible equipment, I haven't found using match loudness to be an issue. It will be an issue when I choose to change DAW eventually, because I feel like Adobe Audition, I've hit the ceiling with Audition. Like it's great for tracks. It's great for, visualizing the material. The shortcuts are ideal. I'm used to it, but I do need to change to a different one. It's probably going to be Reaper or something like that. But yeah, that's essentially top to bottom. Export to whatever format is required generally. Usually I do MP3 at 192 kilobits per second. Sometimes it'll be 320. I don't concern myself much with the export fidelity of the audio that comes out, for the same reason that I mentioned the example of the lawnmower audio going through the Adobe chipper. It's going from this to this is huge. It's what you do in between there, as long as you get to here, doesn't really matter too much. But getting from here to here, match loudness is going to cause issues. But I've got very few clients for whom they're rocking fully soundless spaces with SM7Bs, or whatever kind of high quality mic they could possibly use. And to be clear, when I record my own audio, I don't use DX Revive Pro usually on mine, unless there's a signal that I want to try and make sound the same as the other people I'm recording with. And then I will use it just to kind of equalize the sound a little bit. But yeah, so DX Revive Pro, denoise, DS, de-reverb, de-click, EQ, compression, maybe limit, match loudness, and we're done. Generally, with all things permitting. Yeah.
We do have a question. How do you all, or do y'all find that sometimes DX Revive Pro sometimes does too much if set above about 8%? I haven't run into that at 8%.
I will say something that I've noticed and recommended to people who have asked me about DX Revive Pro and how to use it. House of Gen, this will depend on whether you have DX Revive with just the studio algorithm, or if you've paid for the full version and you've got Studio 2, Studio 3, EQ recovery, natural 1, natural 2. There's lots of different algorithms in there. I do find often that you do land on a percentage number that tends to apply generally in like 60 to 70% of cases within a range most of the time. Like I find that 60 to 64% on Studio 2 tends to do a fairly decent job. On fairly clean audio that just needs a bit of EQ recovery, and Studio 3 tends to not do much under 35% and does way too much, maybe 45, 50% or above. And I tend to float in the studios more so than doing using the recovery algorithms. So could be yes, House of Gen to my mind, but it really depends on the use case and the circumstances. I think we'd have to hear the audio to be able to tell. But Jesse, what do you think?
In my experience, if I remember correctly, DX Revive Pro, and she did say she's using DX Revive Pro, which has all of the different algorithms. I think it
Right.
defaults to 50%, and I can't think of a time where I felt like 50% was doing too much. I feel like
Mm,
that's usually a pretty good starting point, and then I'll adjust up or down from there. On
yeah.
even when I apply it to like my sister's audio, which doesn't really need any noise reduction, just some subtle reverb reduction. I don't think I ever get down to 8%. I think I probably end up probably 20-25%. So I haven't run into a place where I've gotten all the way down to 8%. Let's see.
Interesting.
We've got a
House of Gen
follow
has
up.
followed up there. Yeah.
Lots of noise from my guys, but I have to preserve breaths and verifying she does have pro.
I find it holds on to breaths most of the time. Is that your experience?
Yeah,
Because
I
yeah,
haven't
I've they don't
noticed it,
disappear for me.
but granted, I don't tend to have to do a lot of really heavy noise and reverb reduction. And if I do, I don't know if it's tough to talk about these things without having actual audio playing because
Yeah.
I've mentioned on streams before, but I can't hear things in my head. I can't see things in my head, so it makes it kind of challenging to have that kind of recall, but I can't recall a situation where I've run DX Revive Pro high enough that I didn't hear any breaths. Usually, it
Mm.
seems like a lot of people are running noise reduction on their own systems when they're using Zoom without headphones, which is already killing a lot of the breaths. But for decent sounding audio, I can't say I recall running into that.
No, I don't think it removes it at all. And House of Gen, if this is us giving you permission to dial up the knob just a little bit so that you're not scared that you're going to lose stuff, then by all means do it. I think, I mean, it's, I would think it's very rare that there's a case where the breaths are super important, unless you're doing some sort of narrative thing where the breaths become part of the acting in whatever the scene is that you're trying to record. And then you'd look at your mic setup where if you're finding that the breaths aren't prominent enough through something like DX Revive Pro, aside from telling the people to breathe louder, maybe you need a condenser or an omnidirectional microphone in the space to sync up some of this stuff, unless it's just a preference for the people to retain the breaths. I can't imagine that being a thing. As you say, Jesse, I think we need to hear stuff. I think we need a call-in section for the show to enable people to share this stuff with us so that we can We can play it on stream, maybe. Yeah.
Actually, let's see. Here we go. You should be able to upload sample audio here if you go to tanziasteracademy.com, ask a question. I won't be able to play it live today, but it will give us the opportunity to hear it and address this in the future. But the thing that comes to mind right now is I could see a scenario where someone who has really loud breaths, where DX Revive Pro might determine that to be noise and try to take that out. So I could see that happening.
I've nailed it. House of Jen has followed up and said, bingo, audio drama. So what you're saying there could very well be the case, because we've got to remember that DX Revive Pro is an AI driven algorithmic tool. So if it does presume the breath is noise, it is going to try and reduce it and eliminate it. In which case, the reverse of what I said there might need to be the case. But again, the audio recording setup might be the thing that you look at there. Like, what is the fidelity of the audio drama? Are you recording in the same space? And if not, I don't know. I feel like you can tell actors to breathe different, though. So that might be the solution to the problem, potentially. But yeah, there you go. Feel free to share the show in the chat if you want, House to Jen. I hope you don't mind me calling that as a promotion opportunity, Jesse, but that might be a
Not at
good way
all.
for us to hear what she's doing.
It's part of the conversation.
Excellent. Drop the links and we'll inspect it some other time.
So when you were talking about your process, Matt, you'd asked about DX Revive Pro and how well my computer handles it. For me,
Yeah.
it's not an issue so much of how well my computer can handle it. It can handle it fine. For me, the holdup is Hindenburg. For some reason, they built it as a single core app,
Right.
program, DAW, whatever you want to call it. Even when they just released a new version, a couple of years ago, it's still a single core DAW. And to me, that's just baffling. Why not let people use all of the cores? It's going to make everything easier for anybody doing this kind of work, especially now as the tools are getting stronger as computers get stronger. A really good example are the noise and reverb reduction plugins. They do take a lot of horsepower. DX Revive Pro does pretty good with it. RX's new dialogue isolate is terrible. It's barely faster than real time when rendering. And you said you render out your tracks using, if you were to need to use DX Revive Pro, you're rendering out those tracks beforehand. Is that correct?
Yeah, with DX Revive, I will always bounce the track and use the revived track for whatever happens afterwards. The rest happens in line, just side chaining while I edit, and then for the final export. But DX Revive, if it needs to happen on anything that's longer than 20 minutes, then it happens as a first step every time.
And you're doing that to save time and overall?
Yep. Do you want me to clear that up a little bit?
No, I
'Cause
understand. I'm trying to think of how to follow up that question.
well, let me talk a bit about it, because I think it leads into something that a lot of editors who do it professionally need to consider as a thing. It's the processing, export, preparation times for getting yourself ready to do the actual edit, the thing that you're getting paid for. I find myself sometimes I will find that I try to batch process tracks in preparation when I've got recordings ahead of time so that I can more efficiently edit and do the podcasty edity things more quickly and easily than just doing it top to bottom every single time and waiting for those exports to happen. So this is where I think Audition appears, at least from the way you're describing it, to be a bit more efficient than Hindenburg, to where I can have what would you call them? Yeah, 4 projects running at the same time, each of them DX reviving a separate track in each one. Each one maybe an hour or more. It might increase the time required to export those tracks by 25%, perhaps. But as long as I'm not playing a video game at the same time, the available resources are there. So Audition is probably set up much better to use as many cores are available in the CPU as possible. Maybe not the graphics card. I'm still unsure if it can offload some of the processing there in terms of hardware acceleration or whatever. It's definitely not like next level processing stuff. It's still fairly basic in that sense. But the fact that I can parallel process with a single AI-based algorithmic plugin across 4 to 6 projects at the same time and still do it within for an hour-long processing thing, it might be 20, 25 minutes. And I just kind of muck around on the computer in the background while I'm doing stuff. I find that incredible. And it was kind of a revelation to me that I could do that to speed up the processing of files and start getting things done. But that's me basically babysitting the computer, doing the processing with DX Revive Pro to get to the state where I can start actively editing things. And I might have a project I can edit in the background while those things are exporting. But generally, the parallel processing thing in Audition is something that is a huge advantage. Clearly, it's not in every single DAW. So I might need to be a little bit careful with where I choose to go next if I want to move away from Audition. But the key thing there is that I don't just do top to bottom and wait for something to get done, especially with DX Revive Pro taking 20 minutes to finish. I try to do as much of it and batch it together as I can, have that project ready to go, and then just jump in and start doing all of the other things and then doing the actual edit. So it's a huge consideration, I think, for people who are looking to do multiple projects at the same time, or like in our position where we offer services to people. Try and be as efficient as you can with what you have available. And it could be that what we're talking about today isn't efficient for you, in which case, try your own thing, but learn from us. Maybe don't use Hindenburg if you want a DX Revive Pro. That's what I'm hearing from you.
No, it's fine running it. That's going to be the biggest hurdle with my system. If I have 4 or 5 tracks that need it, it might start to throw up a little bit. But my question is, have you actually timed things to see if you're actually saving time? Because at least on my system, I'm able to render an hour long episode, maybe 75-minute episode in about 20 to 25 minutes. So for me, I'm not seeing if there's actually any benefit for that, but I don't know how long it typically takes your system to render a 60 to 75-minute episode.
So are we talking about right at the end? Let's say we haven't bounced Revive Pro first and just chained all of them together in one go, as opposed to what we've said here, where we bounce first and then, or process DX first and then do the rest. Is
Correct.
that what you mean?
Yeah.
Look, probably not. In fact, it's probably more efficient to do them all in line. But the reason that I process DXRevive first is not because the final edit is done faster, technically. I anticipate potentially having to do revisions and additional exports afterwards. And it's not always the case, but I've found it's a good idea, just in case, to have what is 60-70% of the processing done once. And if you need to go back and do it again, not have to worry about that 60 or 70% again. Whereas if you get one revision back after you've gone through an entire edit, and also like it's, at least I don't know how Hindenburg goes, but for me, running DXRevive inline, side chaining as I, edit the episode and pan and scan and scrub and do all those things, like it doesn't hitch, doesn't slow down at all. It works perfectly fine, just as if it was processed already. But I'd rather export once for that 70% and do two 30% edits, two 30% exports, than have to do 200% exports, because then you've got two 70s and two 30s, if this is going in the right place. So instead of 130% of a overall time, with the other one, you'd have 200%. Yeah, the math adds up. I don't know whether this actually makes sense, but do you know what I mean? Like, you don't want to have to run Revive Pro multiple times if you anticipate exporting multiple times. Now, that's an efficiency for me from a workflow perspective. Not everybody's going to be in the same position. Like, for example, you might be the kind of person who looks at it and goes, well, the export time is the export time. It takes however long it takes. The client needs to deal with that, and I've set expectations appropriately. That's what we're going to do. And that would be perfectly fine too. Like, there's no real technical advantage to doing it unless your system isn't powerful enough to run DXRevive while you edit, in which case it's going to be advantageous there as well. So it's an efficiency from a workflow perspective, not a technical perspective for me. Does that make sense?
It does and it doesn't. It would make more sense for somebody like me, because Hindenburg is terrible. You can only run one instance at a time. But since you're able to, and again, this is just how I see things, and like we talked about at the beginning, there's no right or wrong. I'm just somebody who asks questions to understand other ways of working, and you never know when you're going to learn something. But the way I'm looking at it is you can run multiple instances of Audition at a time. So are you ever in a situation where saving that 20 minutes on rendering a second time with DXRevive Pro inline, where that 20 to 25 minutes is that critical?
When you argue from first principles, I have to say no as a philosophical person. Look, no, it's probably not entirely necessary. But as someone, I guess it's a personal choice from my perspective to do it this way. I do end up saving time when I batch them, because instead of thinking about every single project that you do, and I should be clear too, Adobe Audition doesn't have instances of the application that it runs. It has a number of timelines that it can run in a single instance of the application. So for the tech heads who are, ripping their hair out watching this and going, he's not explaining it, he's not using the right terms. One instance, many projects, many timelines, many whatever. But if we're doing those batch exports and we're looking at the overall timescale that you use, if you're thinking of one project at a time, it doesn't save a whole lot of time. But if in the same space of time you've done 4 projects and export it at the same time, that's one chunk of time that you've then saved and allocated across 4 different projects to then save the time across them all. And this is probably where the mathematical thinking kind of gets lost a little bit because of the way I'm going to explain it. It makes sense in my head, but hopefully I can make it make sense again. But if you layer it on top, like you're being more efficient with that time than if you did just one project with the DX Revive export and then whatever came afterwards and repeating that process again. So you've got four for one chunk. Separate, maybe just, divide that big chunk of processing by 4 in terms of time, and then you're saving time, cumulatively across every project that you do. And yes, I do have the volume of projects that I could be doing across any 1 or 2 days, that cumulative time saved is an advantage. But all of that is to say that it's very much a me thing. It is not, I wouldn't advise other people do it this way. I'd say it's an advantage to know that that's a possibility if you happen to use DX Revive Pro, if you happen not to have a €3,000 machine that can power this stuff and has the resources to allocate to do it effectively. And, that you don't have as many projects as I do. Very personal choice. But yeah, the short answer is no. I think from first principles, I can't argue that what you're saying is untrue.
Well, I'd also be curious to have you time both styles just to see how much real time savings there is versus theoretical. You could be very, I don't know, because I don't work with that style of processing. I can't even think of a way. I don't work with that workflow. And I think part of it for me is I've spent some time in manufacturing where lean manufacturing, there's one piece flow versus batching. And studies have shown that one piece flow is actually more efficient. But I don't know if that necessarily applies to audio editing. That's why I just said I'd be curious to see if there's any real time savings versus theoretical. We do have a few comments in the House of Jen. Feel free to post it. Just to add a little disclaimer that this is not an all ages show. We've got Marco Nike. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. I really favor DX Revive. It's a great plugin and has helped a lot with my room's reverberation. I wasn't big on DX Revive when it first came out because it only had, the one algorithm, but it has gotten significantly better over time. And things like Supertone Clear, which was my favorite when at that point in time, they haven't done anything over time to add algorithms or improve. Just like with iZotope's Dialogue Isolate, they don't update it other than each version of RX. So DX Revive Pro is really running away in this space because they keep updating it and adding more algorithms. We all know, anyone who's cleaned up audio, dialogue audio, knows that there's never one tool that works on every single piece. So having the choice between all of those different algorithms makes it a much more useful tool. And I'm talking specifically about DX Revive Pro. I can't really recommend the plain DX Revive. It's basically just on par with all of the others, like Waves, whatever their
everybody's got one
network
now.
One.
Did you see iZotope has now released a artificially intelligent de-esser, I think. It's called Velvet Tone or something like that.
Yeah,
I think everybody's got one now. Yeah, anyway.
It'll be interesting to see how well that one performs. And really the thing that stands out for me in no, I was thinking gate. Ignore wherever I was going on that. And then
Look,
one more.
we could be talking in three years, and iZotope will have an AI based everything, kind of following everybody's lead. So don't discount it just yet, being wrong. Sorry, yeah, we got one more.
And on that real quick, I'm losing interest in iZotope since they got bought out by Native Instruments. They just seem to be playing follow the leader instead of being the leaders they used to be. The
Yeah,
last release of RX just felt really rushed, even though it was really behind their typical yearly schedule. And I think they were trying to figure out how to get Dialogue Isolate to be remotely usable in that release. I think it'll be
yeah.
better, more efficient in what RX 12, RX 13. I can't remember what the next version is.
12. 12's the next one.
Are you both currently using a gate? If so, it sounds so natural and great. Sorry, just habit. I am using
I
a
was thinking
gate.
you were about to do a joke about the gate and be like, "Oh, my gate just went all the way up."
No, I went to remove his comment, but instinctively muted myself. But I do have a gate on, but I also mute myself when I'm not speaking. So it's a combination of the two.
Yeah, I've got a performative answer where I do mute when I'm not talking, because the peek behind the curtain at the moment is, in order to fix the issue at the beginning of the session, I've got my microphone running into my audio interface that is running through voice meter, through VB cable, and then into Ecamm that we're using right now. And I caught a quick monitor of how it sounds coming out of voice meter with my microphone, and I thought that sounds awful. I hate it. Um, but the muting helps. I also find that when I'm performing, like in a session, that I tend to hold my breath a lot. Like I try to self gate myself, and my lung capacity must be pretty good because I can, you know, not breathe so much that it's ungainly. I know that I breathe a little bit. Um, but yeah, I'd say that the mute button is probably the thing that's giving us the gated experience. But we got safe recording environments too. I'd say we're pretty quiet, so our you know bass level is probably pretty good.
Yeah, that does help. One more
Mm.
comment. Have you guys ever tried Waves NS1 for broadband noise reduction? I did try that. I think I got it for free or really cheap, and I got it because I saw so many people raving about it. I don't see it mentioned so much these days, but like a couple of years ago, I saw it recommended quite often, and I really was not impressed with it. But
Yeah,
then I've
I
always
would.
had iZotope RX, which before I started using Supertone Clear or DX Revive Pro for all of my audio cleanup, I was doing everything in RX, which is night and day better than NS1.
My I'm looking at it now, and I mean, Waves always has a sale on, but I'm seeing it at 149 regular retail price down to $39. That would be a marketing strategy to me, more so than a saving on what sounds like an excellent plugin. It doesn't sound excellent. Waves also is very hit and miss, I think, with their plugins most of the time. Um, I haven't tried NS1. I've never felt like diving into it. I'm not really a plugin comparison guy. I kind of find the one that I like and stick with that for as long as I can until I see a need for something extra. Jesse, you're definitely the one who takes them all onto the test bed and see what they actually do.
A lot of that is more to help other people hear how
Yeah.
they compare. For me, I'm pretty much the same. I have a handful of plugins I use every day. I don't go out looking for something until I find a need for it. And I see a lot of people who, and I've been guilty of this in the past on the music side, just collecting plugins because it looks cool or the marketing's good, or I think, oh, I could use this for this purpose. But at the end of the day, having a handful of tools you know inside and out is much better than having a toolbox with hundreds of plugins that you never use, because you're not going to get to that level of efficiency of knowing it inside and out, knowing what its weaknesses are, knowing what its strengths are. And really, that's why I've moved to basically using DX Revive Pro and Sonible plugins, because I can go from getting the audio to having a rough mix in about 3 to 5 minutes. Most of that time is just training the plugins. Making the switch from, let's go back about 2 or 3 years, I can't remember. My process was go into RX, process, do all of the cleanup there, render that file out, bring it into my DAW, do the same thing for any other tracks, bring those into my DAW. Now I have to set up my mix. That whole process would take 30, 45 minutes for a 2 or 3 person episode. Now I can be up and running in 5 minutes or less. So I've replaced the entire RX workflow with Sentize's DX Revive Pro. I've streamlined my mix process, which would have probably taken me 10 to 15 minute track, or 10 to 15 minutes per track, to 5 minutes total per episode. So Sonible has really helped me speed up that process. And I didn't have any clients comment positively or negatively when I made each of these switches. They never noticed any change in quality or EQ. They didn't notice any kind of change that was notable enough to comment on. So it goes back to, it's very easy to overthink things and put more effort into these things than the audience actually needs. We do
Or
have,
the podcaster is often, like as you said, no feedback. They rarely know. The bravado that people have, I think we both kind of chuckle a little bit when we see someone ask a question in a podcast forum about what they use for their vocal saturation. Like, how do you saturate the vocals enough for your mix? And we're kind of like, what are you talking about? Get it listenable. It's good enough. But sorry, you were going to jump on a comment there.
what are your top 3 desert island plugin choices?
Take a
I
guess
think
for number one.
I think for dialogue, we'd have to go at least to 5, because I look at it as we've got, I'm not sure how many categories, so I'm just going to count as I say them. We've got noise and reverb reduction. So that would be, for me, I think for everybody on the stream and commenting on the stream, that's going to be DX Revive Pro. We've got like mouth noise. So I'm going to go with Mouth Declick by iZotope. We've got plosives and sibilants, so I'd go Sonible Smart DS. We have EQ. I'd go Sonible Smart EQ. If you're someone who wants to be more hands-on with it, I would say FabFilter Pro Q. I think that's Pro Q3 or Pro Q4 now. We've got compression,
Yep.
Sonible Smart Compressor, smart compression, whatever it's called, and then a loudness meter. So Julian loudness meter, that's 5. 6 would be a limiter. So I'd go Sonible smart limiter. So basically, for me, my desert island picks are DX Revive Pro and the Sonible smart plugin suite.
Yeah, you're paying for the extra luggage to the desert island so that you can get your extra stuff in. I was going to say something similar though, in the sense that Adobe Audition, they have a lot of inbuilt plugins, and one of them is called Dynamics, in which you can gate, compress, and expand all in a single plugin. So to take a hit on the quality of what those three processes would be like, is it worth just having one plugin just so you can have it with you? For me specifically, I'd be thinking about these as I record myself. And to eliminate the things that I don't need, I would think about what I can adjust in the recording to make sure I don't need them. And one of those would be noise. Don't need that necessarily. EQ recovery and a little bit of like reverb and noise reduction. I think DX Revive Pro has to go on the list. And look, if someone from Accentize stumbles on this and realizes we're not actually currently sponsored by DX Revive Pro, I think that's a missed opportunity. I think we've just done like, what are we up to now? An hour and 20 minutes, give or take some technical issues, on why DX Revive Pro is a great shortcut and an effective shortcut for people to use. You should auto include every single time. I think mouth declick would have to be an auto include as well for me, just because it doesn't have any downsides. It only has upsides. And the only other thing that I couldn't possibly manage myself is like, controlling my mouth and voice and whatever comes out. I think it would have to be EQ. Because, I mean, how much reverb are you going to have on a desert island, right? Not many walls to bounce off. So, but maybe I'm taking it a bit too literally. But yeah, DX Revive Pro, mouth declick, and some sort of EQ. Let's go with FabFilter. That sounds good.
Actually, from what you were saying, I think I could probably skip the EQ because when I coach people, they ask me, what do I really need? EQ is something that it makes a subtle difference, but provided you have decent audio, you don't have any really huge resonances, most people aren't going to appreciate the difference between the EQ'd versus non-EQ'd audio. So EQ, it's easier now with something like Sonible Smart EQ because it reduces the learning curve and the reliance on good monitoring to really know what you're doing. So from that perspective, EQ can cause a lot of damage if you don't have the right experience and the right monitoring to hear what you're doing. So I could probably cut mine down to 5 plugins by cutting out the EQ altogether.
So you got extra carry on. You don't have to check an additional bag. That's okay.
Yeah.
I think that's acceptable.
And we talked about this at the beginning, and I think it's something to circle back to. And that's when we're actually editing. We've talked about the gate, and I started alluding to that I basically use the gate for breath control and stuff, little quiet sounds in between when somebody's talking. But for everything else, my first step when I start, the first step after I bring all of the tracks into the DAW is to go through and cut out all of the dead air. And that's basically any section on each track where the person is not talking. So my gate really isn't doing a whole lot of work. I could really get away without it. but it's for those times where you have quieter sounds in the background while somebody's thinking. You've got like a 2-second pause. There might be little sounds in there. The gate helps keep those out because otherwise the perfectionist, the editor in me is going to want to cut that out. So with the gate, it saves me from taking the time to physically cut that out. How do you do
Agreed.
something similar?
I have gated for a very long time, and I came up in the you must gate to avoid breaths moment, all the way into when people start going, don't use a gate. Gates are awful. They cut out the things that you want to keep in the episode. All those things are people who don't know how to use a gate, right? But the funny thing is that, like, I can show you in Todoist that I use to manage my tasks the list of Sonible apps that you've mentioned over the last year or so, I think, and have been meaning to try them out. I currently use that Dynamics plugin with the gate in Adobe Audition. I have a very soft kind of setting to it. It's like very slight. It doesn't close off absolutely everything, but does close off the noises. If there's a heavy breath, it kind of opens up a little bit. But it does eliminate most of that stuff. And I think it's so handy. I think people really underestimate the value of using a very soft gate to eliminate like all that stuff that you'd get annoyed with and just cut as you're going through. Saves you so much time. So yeah, I'm a gator.
I actually, I'm more of a fan of downward expansion. Is that right? Yeah, downward
Yes.
expansion instead of a gate because it allows you
Mm.
to keep a more consistent sound instead of cutting to black whenever the gate closes. You can keep a consistent noise floor, which makes it a little more transparent. But a lot of gates don't offer that. So
Mm.
when I was doing that, I was using FabFilter's Pro G. And if it's not clear, if I'm not using Sonible, I'm going to be using FabFilter plugins. Primarily because they have what I've found the best interfaces for being able to isolate and hear what you're actually doing, as well as good UI to see what you're doing. It makes it so much
Mm.
easier when I'm trying to teach something because I can solo what's being worked on, what's not being worked on. I can isolate those things. So Sonible and FabFilter, those are the two companies I tend to use when working with dialogue.
That's pretty cool. And if you look at anything with FabFilter's EQ plugin, the way I've seen people uh, sidechain to duck EQ during music moments, for example, to etch out space in the music for vocals and stuff, and the way that it structures the different like the Q levels and how you can move, they just seem like they have it really switched on. It's expensive for that reason, but yeah, I guess that's my dream. Uh, if I could get a plug-in for Christmas, I'd be getting a FabFilter something.
Yeah, being a Hindenburg user, I can't sidechain anything. They don't think stuff like that's important. They don't, they've made it clear they don't cater to audio engineers. They limit us to 5 plugins per track. But
They
that's kind of
don't, do
beside the
they?
point. What?
They don't. They don't actually just have 5 per track, do they?
It's 5 or 6, yeah.
Good lord. Okay.
Because according to the founder, if you need more than that, you're overthinking it. I'll just leave
What?
that there.
Yep. Okay. Proceed.
So, just for fun, what's your favorite snack and drink to have in the studio? The only thing I don't eat in the studio, the only thing I ever have, the only thing I drink period is water.
Those are the right answers. If you're eating and drinking in the studio, unless you're mixing rap music, you don't want anything to fall on anything. And it's a workflow thing too. Like, you don't want to eat in the same space that you work. It's good to have a break and get out of the room and eat something outside,
And
I think.
without fail, as soon as you go to take a sip of water, or if you have food, take a bite, that's when you have to pause, stop to make an edit, without fail.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I literally just, as you were saying this stuff, I just poured water all over my chin. You're listening and you're scanning and you're like, oh God, and then you have to scroll back and listen again and then cut it again. Yeah. Quite inefficient, I think. Um, but we got a couple more comments coming in. People were really excited about the plugins. I think this might have to be a regular segment.
I think so. House of Jen, I'm definitely going to have to check out the Sonible. It's Sonible. I'll throw in an affiliate link in the comments in just a minute. It's not something I'm familiar with. And then we've got, do you guys do the dialogue edits at the same time as the dialogue mix, or is it a blend? For me, I do everything as I go. So I'll set up my mix and I'll start editing. Keep in mind, I edit interviews. I don't know if you are only doing narratives, but the workflow for a narrative is probably going to be a little bit different depending on the structure or the process in place. But for
Yep.
me, I set up my mix, I start editing. That way, and that's why I use the limiter. I want to hear the way the episode's going to sound when it's published as I edit. That way, if I need to make changes to the EQ or the compression or noise reduction, I can do that as I'm going rather than breaking it up into two different processes or trying to do a hybrid approach. But if I were doing narrative, I'd probably not even really worry about the mix itself until all of the pieces are in place and everything's been approved. And again, for me, that's about an efficiency thing, because if I spend all of the time getting everything mixed 100%, and then they decide, you know what, I don't like this piece of music, we need to put something else in. I've spent all of that time trying to make the music fit the best it could, EQing, like Matt was talking about, to allow dialogue more space to be heard, getting the levels perfect, and all to have the music changed. We're just wasting a little bit of time there. That's how I would approach it. What about you, Matt?
Agree wholeheartedly. And the way that I've kind of reflected on it after a little bit, because I've done a bit of like the narrative, not narrative stuff, but like a bit of sound design stuff. I think whatever requires a little bit of creativity will require doing multiple passes to make it work. And you'll have a workflow that's most effective for you when you start to think out how it goes. Like, you can't do, like we're talking about, the full mix before you start doing the actual dialogue edits for a narrative piece. You just can't do it that way, as Jesse said. But I try to do it front to back as well. It's a conversation. Clean it up and do tiny little cleans as you go through. I have been taught or told in the past that people sometimes edit the content before they do any of the mixing and the mastering, but I just don't know how people could possibly do that. Suffice, like, not even like listening to audio that is poor seems as enough of a punishment for me that I wouldn't want to sit down for 60 minutes and listen to someone's lawnmower while I'm editing an episode. That's why I started doing it in the first place. And then someone tried to teach me to do the content edit first and then do the mastering. And I was like, nah, can't do it, mate. Sorry. Gotta clean it up first. You don't want to move furniture in a dirty house. Put it that way.
No. And I think a lot of those people who have talked about breaking it up into I edit and then I mix, I think a lot of those people are either self-taught. I don't see as many people talking about that nowadays, and I think that's because so many people have moved into using Descript and Riverside for editing that it's changed
Yeah.
the workflow for a lot of people that were otherwise working in those more inefficient ways. Got
Yeah.
another
Because you can't
comment.
you can't can't do it in bits and pieces with them. It's like one thing at a time. You either do the edits and then you do the processing. But sorry, comment. I keep interrupting you today. I'm sorry.
No problem. But to follow up on that, when you do it that way, it's just an inefficient workflow because you have to
Yeah.
listen through it twice. The only way I could see that being beneficial is it changes your mindset so you could listen a little bit differently, but you need to, that's not going to, I guess that doesn't help because you need to have that mindset shift when you edit. You need to be listening like a listener would, not a critical editor. We need to turn that critical listening skill off when we edit and just focus on the major distractions, the types of things that are going to be annoying to the listener, and not trying to remove every teeny tiny subtle little thing.
Yeah. The psychology of remembering in your short term memory 7 plus or minus 2 things. If 6 of those things are the compression you need to do, the EQ you need to make, the denoise you have to do, that leaves very little room to do the actual dialogue editing itself. I agree.
I always use analog hiss from a reel-to-reel tape machine at negative 65 dB to add warmth and help mask any clamping effects from soft gating, if any. What are your thoughts on adding noise? I'll let you go
You want to
first.
go first? No, we said at the same time. Okay, here it is. Noise is helpful if you're trying to build a space. This is to my mind. Like when we're not going to. I mean, Jesse, you might bring it up. Your aphantasia probably prevents you from experiencing the things that I'm trying to explain now. But like, if you want to create a space, if you want to create that warmth, because the space you're trying to simulate with the editing of the conversation requires that warmth, then by all means. For example, for a client with Activate Your Podcast that I'm currently working with, Nick O'Brien, he wants to do invitation episodes and for podcast guests that he'd like to bring on. And the way I've structured these is as if he's sitting at a table with a tape deck playing bits of audio from the potential podcast guests episodes. And I added noise to that, like just ambient noise of an apartment in a busy city block or something. I don't think noise without an intention like that adds any value to what is otherwise just a conversation as a podcast. I think this kind of thinking is a holdover from people wanting to capture as much of the space that people are in as possible. And I hear this in podcasts sometimes for people who aren't audio engineers, but are often videographers, that they tend to have room tone at the bottom level of the podcast. I don't know whether it's to mask stuff like Marco's mentioning here, but my general opinion is that I don't want to add any analog noise, even at negative 65 dB. Like I don't know what part of the brain is helping make the quality be good with something like that. Maybe you can enlighten me, Jesse. But what do you think?
For me, this sounds like a fix for a different type of problem. If you're trying to have consistency and that's how I read this to help mask any clamping effect artifacts from soft gating. I'd rather hear room tone because the hiss from a reel-to-reel tape machine, it's not going to match the room tone of the person speaking. That's still going to call a little bit of attention to itself. But yeah, I can't advocate adding noise, especially white noise, to a podcast unless you have a very specific need, like Matt was talking about, from a sound design
Mm,
perspective, where it adds something. Like you're trying to mimic the sound of something that was recorded on tape in the 60s. Then you'd probably want to add some of that. To
yeah.
the way I look at it in the music world, everybody talks about how they're so happy that the new tape emulations allow you to turn off that noise because people hated the noise that analog tape created. That was always the bane of their existence. And now we have people talking about adding it in. It's, to me, it's like adding distortion onto a voice, onto dialogue, saturation. I just, I don't understand it. Okay, it can add a little bit, a very subtle something to enhance intelligibility. But I think at that point, we're just overthinking things, and nobody is going to go, hey, you know what? I, I can hear that saturation. That makes it this so much more pleasurable to listen to. I
And
think that
that's
goes
the
back
thing,
into
right?
what we've talked about overthinking things. Marco, in your case, if you're trying to mask the, and I'm not sure what you mean by the clamping artifacts. I would take that to mean the way it cuts to black. I don't think
Mm,
white noise is really going to mask anything. It's just a different, you're trading one sound for another. You're trading complete silence for white noise, neither of which match the noise profile of the dialogue, which is what calls attention to itself. I know that was kind of rambly, but that's my take on it. And I
yeah,
do have a hard stop at 10, so we're going to start wrapping things up here. So, do you have
for sure.
anything else to add?
Uh, no. I don't think we actually got to the actual cutting and editing of things. I think we got through plugins, setting up our workspaces to get ready to do our dialogue cutting and editing and removal, shuffling up, reshuffling, whatever that might involve. So maybe that's what we do next week. Is actually move on from the sound quality and the mastering and the export and talk a little bit about how we treat dialogue as we slice and dice in our various platforms and share some skills from that. What do you think?
That's exactly what I was thinking. Well, next week we'll talk about editing itself, how we approach it, and tips for how we've sped up our process, how we've gotten better, and just the short version. It's not, you have to practice. There's no shortcut for getting better. You just have to get those reps in, and you're not going to get that if you're only working on the the editing of the content you're putting out, whether it's your own or for a client. You've got to put some time into practicing.
And just as a preview, I will be talking about, I think it's David Kahneman's System 1 and System 2 thinking, as well as short and long term memory and cognitive load as a way to practice. Because I think I've talked about it on a previous episode before, that efficiency of work where it getting the reps in really helps you get faster. I have noticed there are times where I kind of float off in my brain, but I'm still cutting and editing the same way that you drive a car and you don't realize you're driving after a little while. It can get that ingrained with the practice and the reps, and we'll talk a little bit about how that works on the stream next week.
So just to wrap up, if you're enjoying our streams, like them, subscribe to get alerts. We're here to help. If you can't make the live stream, you can always ask questions ahead of time and we'll get to them. House of Jen, I'm going to need a little context there. Let me
I'm
finish
looking up
this.
Frankenbites right now. Keep going.
But you can ask a question at tanziasteracademy.com/ask a question. And we'll pop up her comment now. Would you please cover Frankenbites next week? I wonder if she means just Frankensteining together words or sentences. That's all I can think
Yes.
of.
So here is a definition from you r/the amazing race for some reason on Reddit. Worst Frankenbites in tar history. The explanation begins. A Frankenbite is when the producers take 2 or more interview clips from a contestant and combine them into one coherent thought that is covered by B-roll. All reality shows use them, sometimes to provide context or transition words, other times to manipulate and create a quote that was never said. So exactly what you just said. Taking different sentences and Frankensteining them together to create a different context than if they were just left alone by themselves.
Yes, we will definitely cover that next week.
Yes.
So we'll see you all next week. Thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.